Welcome back to the Higher Form Podcast. We're here every week having real conversations with leaders, coaches, and everyday people about what it takes to become your best. We know life will test you, and we're here to share practical tips, tools, and relatable stories to help you build the highest form of your life. Today we are joined by James O'Hara. He is a nurse practitioner and the co-host of the Gillett Health Podcast. James is a practitioner with experience spanning emergency med, cardiology, orthopedics, and integrative medicine. He specializes in preventative med, health optimization, and today we're here to talk about the situation where maybe you don't feel great, but you go to your doctor, you ask them for feedback, and they do your labs. They come back normal, and you're stuck with no direction. I'm sure that sounds somewhat familiar. Maybe you've heard that story before.
Yeah, that's how a lot of people find us, to be honest. They want to go a level deeper and, labs coming back normal. It depends on how many things you're checking. I mean, at your routine annual physical, you're usually not checking that much in the traditional setting. Maybe you're getting a lipid panel, getting your CBC, looking at your hematology parameters, kidney and liver function. So if you're not in kidney failure, not in liver failure, and you're not anemic, maybe they check a thyroid once in a while, then it's yeah, everything looks good. But then, if they did something like a, height to waist circumference ratio, they could say, for most of the population, there is something that's off here, or could be improved, or something that you need to be working on to improve your long-term health.
Yeah, we run into that example a lot here at Avexia, where someone comes in, they have 30 or more pounds to lose, and they report not feeling very strong or having great endurance, yet they're like, my doctor said my labs are good, so I'm healthy, but I just would like to lose some weight and get in shape. And I've been in the game long enough, and you obviously understand this at a really high level with what you guys do at Gillett Health, that using the term healthy in that scenario maybe is not the best blanket statement, just because the labs come back not bad. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you could say, well, we've ruled out hypothyroidism, we've ruled out anemia, we've ruled out kidney and liver failure, but that doesn't necessarily mean someone is getting a clean check of okay, you are perfectly healthy.
Yeah.
There's always a reason why someone feels the way they do. If you look at most people's complaints, it's fatigue, or I want to improve my body composition, but I don't look at weight as much as body composition.
Yep.
BMI is going to be pretty good at the population level, but yourself and myself are probably BMI. We're going to get flagged as hey, you're overweight. Your life insurance is going to be more expensive because you're overweight.
Yep.
But do you want to know my waist circumference or see my DEXA scan? They're nope, you just go in this box.
Yeah.
So there's a lot more to it than just those basic labs. I mean, when we order a panel, there's a couple dozen different causes of fatigue we're ruling out all in one go, right? So you don't, check one thing, 3 months later, you're going back to check your thyroid, and then maybe you get a vitamin D, then maybe you get a vitamin B12, then maybe if you're lucky, you get your ferritin checked, and you're just kind of on this sequential system if you're in the traditional setting, where they are not ordering a whole lot of things at once, not because they don't want to, but because of the sort of insurance network they have to navigate.
Yeah, can you describe this difference between normal versus optimal? Because I don't know that a lot of people understand the massive variety of results that can fall in the normal range with some of these reference ranges in different labs. Yeah,
I mean, the ones that come to mind for me are hormonal, right? So if you take a woman in perimenopause who has symptoms oh, I'm not sleeping as well, I feel like I have some brain fog, my mood is not as good as it used to be, and you check a hormone panel, basically, unless you get an undetectable estradiol level, it's going to show up in a normal range. And even that undetectable level shows on the lab as normal for menopausal. Mm-hmm. So whether your estradiol is 400 or 100 or 30, and I will say not all traditional docs are bad at this, but a lot of them don't pick when in the menstrual cycle to actually check these things. Mm-hmm. They say, oh yeah, it's normal. And that's if you're getting an estradiol level. They may say kind of, hey, this is just perimenopause, and this is going to happen until you hit 51 and go through menopause.
Yeah.
So it's funny because almost anywhere you check it, yeah, the lab is going to be normal, but should you be having an estradiol level of 20 when you should be ovulating? It should be at least 10 times that generally when you're post-ovulatory. So that's a big one. And the male equivalent, testosterone levels, Like the sort of position statement of a lot of traditional docs is, maybe I'm going to kind of straw man them a little bit, but there's no difference between a testosterone of 301 and 900. They're both normal levels. The receptors are all saturated. And that's obviously not the case. And you
Yeah.
look for the underlying cause, right? You're not necessarily saying, oh, testosterone's low, give testosterone. That happens a lot, like in this sort of telemedicine space that we're in now.
Yeah.
But you want to figure out, okay, well, why is it low? What can we do to see what your natural potential is before we consider just a knee-jerk reflex to testosterone, and then we miss that somebody has a brain tumor.
Yeah.
But there's these things that you have to take very seriously first.
When you look at like the lab ranges, how are those even created? Like when you're looking for identifying more optimal ranges, like who is responsible for creating those? Do you guys have your own ranges that you guys have created based off of the medical assessments you guys do and some of the different lab profiles? How do you set a reference range? Like whose job is that? Is there a overarching industry or regulatory place that does that?
Yeah, so the labs, if you look at like your standard reference range, which, we have those customized in some of the tools we use in our internal reference ranges that are kind of what we're striving for, that are optimal for people. It's actually better than people say. People say, oh, well, it's because you're looking at a sick population. And you could argue that that's still a little bit true, but they do generally exclude people with like chronic medical conditions, obesity. So they're looking at like a normal BMI American population.
Gotcha.
So it's a little better than people think. It's not like, oh, yeah, of course they're
I've heard that before where they're like, oh, you're just referencing it off of sick people or not sick people.
Yeah. And people will make the statement. There's one I've heard is like, normal labs mean they're just as crappy as everybody else's. Right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of the argument made. So there's a little bit of truth to that because there are some normal BMI people who are not optimally metabolically healthy because, Americans on average are walking like 3,000 or 4,000 steps a day and consuming too much. And we have, robots that vacuum our houses for us. Like there's not a lot of movement that happens.
Yeah.
But what we do is take like, I'll just pick an example with homocysteine.
Yep.
Everybody is sort of being scared of, MTHFR and like folate as opposed to methylfolate. And like folate by itself, it is fine. Most people are going to do fine with that. Some people will get a little bit like amped up by it, kind of some nervous wired energy. But if you measure your blood level of homocysteine, that's like your end point of this process of methylation in your body. And about 50% of what you do methylation for is to make creatine. So taking something like creatine will actually lower that homocysteine level. The methylated B vitamins like methylfolate or methylcobalamin that are actually in most of the multivitamins now, that will also lower the homocysteine. And if you look at, say, someone with heart disease and the all-cause mortality data, it looks like, below 10 is the best there. And then if you look at long-term cognitive outcomes in older adults, if people are low in B12, having a higher homocysteine, you see more brain shrinkage. So we can take those two pieces like, hey, here's heart disease, here's brain health, and like in the spirit of doing things that are associated with better outcomes, we can strive to get people down below 10 on their homocysteine, and most people can achieve that with probably a third of what the supplement bottle says to take. It's like take 3 capsules. I always tell people, just start with 1 and let's see what the blood test shows us. And a lot of people get like a really good improvement from just a low dose.
So how often would you recommend that somebody does like a test and retest on a lab? Say you had a patient come to you for whatever it might be. You guys do an assessment, you implement a protocol, supplements, lifestyle changes. What kind of reassessment timeline would you typically recommend?
Generally, it's going to be about 3 months because usually we're working on a couple things at the same time. Try not to do too many things at the same time because then if something causes a side effect, you're a benefit, you're trying to play detective and figure out what's going on. So we try to keep it fairly simple, and about 3 months makes sense. Sometimes we'll do sooner for like hormone replacement, where it's like, let's get a 6-week check and kind of see where things are and then adjust up or down, see how you're feeling. But generally 3 months, especially if we're talking about like, vitamin D and kind of waiting for those levels to go up. Or if you're looking at iron, if someone is already anemic, you're going to have to utilize some of that iron they're taking to bring up the red blood cell count. And then also wait for the iron levels, the ferritin to replete. So 3 months is a pretty good, medium there. I mean, if we're talking about just kind of your average person who wants to get some labs done once in a while, I think once a year could be acceptable if someone's in pretty good general health and just kind of want to check on things periodically and, that would be supplemental to the, annual physical and blood work they're getting there. And then, twice a year for people that are, tinkering with things a little bit and want to try things. And then, if you're someone who's a little bit more, tinkering with things even more often and trying to do it that way, then I do, full panel about every 3 months. And
Gotcha.
every once in a while, I'll spot check something even in between those.
The typical thing that I think most people are told is like, do your blood work once a year and then we'll check back on it. Everything is normal. Like, what are the things you would check in just an annual assessment that maybe some of the general practitioners aren't doing?
Yeah, I mean, your annual physical is like I kind of outlined. You've got a CBC, CMP looks at your electrolytes, kidneys and liver, thyroid. We're going to look at basically the top 3 micronutrient deficiencies in every panel, which you don't get on your annual physical. It's
Yeah.
kind of shocking to me if you look at the diet quality of the average person, and then it's like, well, is our population, they're well nourished maybe, but not like with micronutrients, if that
Yeah,
makes sense.
macronutriently, they're
Yeah,
very well
macronutriently
like
nourished.
overnourished.
Yeah.
So what are some of like the top ones that you miss? Like you talk
Yeah,
about.
so a vitamin D, like ferritin,
Yep.
which is your iron, and we check the ferritin along with C-reactive protein, because if somebody is in an inflammatory state, whether that's secondary to obesity or they just got over a cold, something like that, it's going to falsely elevate the ferritin. Like the ferritin actually does go up, but it's not that you have a better iron status. It's that you have more iron stores in the white blood cells when you're measuring that. So you can give somebody a false reassurance, like, hey, yeah, you're tired, but your ferritin looks great. If you don't have that C-reactive protein, which is just a broad inflammatory marker,
Yep.
then you're not, and maybe 90% of the time it's fine, but you're going to miss some every once in a while. So
Yeah.
there's the iron, vitamin D, and then vitamin B6. Those are your top 3. And we'll also look at folate and B12. If we're looking at some like trace minerals, we'll look at like red blood cell copper, red blood cell zinc. Like someone like yourself or myself is going to always have a low or low normal serum copper. Andy Galpin is the first one I saw talk about this. He's like, if you have more lean body mass, you exercise intensely, your serum copper just seems to be low. And when we've cross-checked that against the red blood cell copper, which is a better proxy for like what's actually in the tissues in your body, we do see a discordance there where the red blood cell looks normal, kind of middle of the range, and it's just that serum level that's lower. So that's interesting. And those are things we can look at to avoid deficiencies. Because some people, if they've been on certain medications for a long period of time, the antacids, proton pump inhibitors that people kind of like go in, they're like, hey, I've got heartburn. They get put on a pill and it's supposed to be maybe 4 weeks, 8 weeks, but they take it for 20 years and now they're not absorbing their magnesium. And it's kind of this pharmaceutical cascade.
Yeah.
Those are things we look at. And then, the sex hormones, right? A lot of people wish they had a baseline from, 20 years ago. Because you look at a guy and he's, say 55, he's checking his testosterone level and it's, okay, but it's like, where were you when you were 20? Has your testosterone always been at like 550? That's not a bad testosterone. But if it was at 1,000 and you're like, yeah, I think I did feel a lot better. Like I had more drive and I was recovering better from exercise and now doing all the same things, same body composition, but I feel like I'm taking longer to recover. Part of that is going to be normal, right? If you look at it as a pie chart, like some normal changes in age-related recovery do happen.
Yep.
But by nature of testosterone doing what it does, it just promotes better exercise recovery, more testosterone, better recovery. That's why you see people misusing it in, sports, Olympics, or using it in the enhanced games.
I'm so glad you brought that up because I'm really curious about your perspective on that. I know that you guys are all in the world of peptides, and I like the approach that you take around really validating the use of any type of medically supervised enhancements, I guess you could say. And my perception of the enhanced games is that these people are all going to be juiced up and we're going to see a ton of world records broken and that this is going to be an amazing thing to watch. And then I tuned into some of it and it was kind of like a little bit of a disappointment, expecting that they were going to see like super freak, superhuman performances, and we didn't see that. Like, I'm really curious about your perspective of that, just from the point of view you have, obviously, with what you guys do and your level of awareness and understanding around the physiological effects of what those things can do for people.
Yeah, and I was similarly disappointed. Like
Yeah.
I thought, oh, maybe we will see some cool stuff, but they're adding so many things together. Like the swimming records,
Hmm.
that was probably more the super suits they were wearing rather than the performance enhancement protocols they were
Yeah.
on. But I mean, from our perspective, clinically, we work with people that are using these substances. I'm not prescribing people EPO, right? But I have patients that will use that, and
Yeah.
we look at it from a harm reduction standpoint. It's like, hey, somebody's going to do this. How do we help them be safe, like as safe as is reasonable,
Hmm.
right? I mean, the default answer I'm is like, hey, like as a medical professional, I recommend you stop doing this.
Yeah.
But if you're not, here are steps you can take to like track your risk, mitigate risk. Like, probably anabolic steroids is the most common thing that, it's just everywhere. It's accessible to people, and people are like, yeah, I'm willing to take a little bit of risk, but if I find out that my heart's getting enlarged, it's like that's going to be a sign for me to pump the brake pedals. People
Yeah.
have a threshold of like, okay, that's too much risk. I'm going to go back to something that's more reasonable. But I'm interested to see where it goes in the coming years. I don't think that they have the firepower right now to recruit like current top Olympic athletes.
Yeah.
But if you took some of those people and put them in the enhanced games protocols, even if they were using some of those substances, you probably do see some improvements. But it's so tricky because like weather conditions, tailwind, headwind, if we're
Yeah.
talking about the sprinting,
Yeah.
somebody can have an off day. So, I mean, I don't think we're going to take like a full second off the 100-meter dash. It's going to be very marginal.
Yeah.
But I'm interested to follow it and see where it goes.
I was expecting that. I mean, I know that that doesn't even sound that logical when you think about the separation of, the people at the Olympic level and that at the world class level is like it's by hundredths of a second a lot of times.
Yeah.
But for whatever reason, I was going into it thinking like we're going to see like a 9.3 100-meter dash, like somebody's going to blow this out of the water. But um, what I like something about what you just said, and I think that this isn't as common either in the medical practice where people may want to do things that aren't traditionally well accepted by their doctor. For example, using certain substances or whatever it might be. But the fact that you guys take kind of like a general approach to saying like, okay, this isn't necessarily something I would highly recommend, but if that's what you choose to do, we're not going to judge you for it. We're actually going to help you navigate this safely and strategically so that you can, get whatever benefits you're desiring from it and try to reduce the overall risk. I think a lot of people's perspective, at least when I sit down with clients and they tell me about their experiences with their doctors, are like, well, my doctor told me to do this and told me not to do that. And sometimes it feels like there's as much of an opinion related in the situation or the recommendation as there is any type of like science-backed validation or support, if that makes any sense. What do you think it is that has led you guys in this path of just saying like, look, whatever you want to do, I support it, but we're going to give you the full picture instead of saying like, no, you should or shouldn't do that? What do you think drew you guys to take that approach?
Yeah. I think it's just about like meeting people where they are and this concept of individualized medicine,
Mm-hmm.
where like you have to start with the traditional foundational things and in the large studies that kind of show signals of like, hey, this is a good thing for most people to do. But you're going to have people where that doesn't fit their case. It's not necessarily a cookie cutter model with what we're doing. Everyone has different goals, different values. And I try to, stick by the motto or whatever you want to call it of like as natural as reasonable when we're
Yeah.
optimizing somebody's health. So if somebody just has like a little bit of health that they need to improve, like one certain area, you can do that pretty naturally. If someone is diabetic and they're about to lose a foot, like, okay, we need to do something more aggressive than just like changing your diet. It's changing your diet right, there's additional things there.
Yeah.
But I think the like harm reduction side of it is it's not really any different in my mindset than like other marginalized population. Like, if someone is using like heroin or opiates and they have a problem,
Yeah.
right? They go into their doctor, the same doctor that just fired this guy for using steroids and said, don't ever come back to my clinic. And he's like, oh, you're using heroin. Let me get you a bunch of resources to help you and keep you safe.
Yeah.
So in my mind, it's just a different substance. I know enough about the substance to know, hey, what are the bad things this could possibly do for this person and how to test for them, and then how to, we can't promise that we're going to 100% prevent any negatives, but how can we best mitigate them?
Yeah. When I had Kyle on the podcast, one of the things he talked about is like why, you don't see as many people drawn into like the general family medicine side of it is because it's not as sexy and not sold as like the most lucrative opportunities. And one of the things he had mentioned that I thought was really cool, and obviously you guys take the same approach in the way that you do things, was how you try to look at this from like a really preventative measure on the lifestyle side. And I think that you're integrating health, you're integrating medicine, you're integrating the bigger picture of things. And that's another thing you don't see common in family medicine. How did you even create this approach and kind of cultivate this strategy for how you guys support people?
Yeah, so we've been up and running for a little over 4 years now in the
Okay.
Kansas City area. That's about when the wife and I relocated here.
Where are you
I
from originally? Where are you coming from?
Southern Illinois, but
Okay.
we moved from Southern Indiana, so it's all Midwest.
Yeah.
But Kyle called me up because he was a medical director at Merrick Health, and his contract was up there, and mine was up shortly after that. And he said, "Hey, do you want to, start something together that's, like we have more autonomy and kind of do our own thing and make it what we want it to be?" And I said, "Well, let me ask the wife." That's a smart thing to say. And then several months later, we had, sold our place, relocated here to Kansas City. And we were, putting together like, hey, what is the best, starting lab panels for people to get, just kind of building up this framework. And we landed on like, well, what do we call it? Is it, precision medicine? Is it, functional medicine, which means a lot of different things and
Yeah,
sometimes isn't so evidence-based. And we just landed on individualized medicine, which the term, I guess, used to be used by Mayo Clinic for some of their like cancer program, if I'm not mistaken. But then they, I think, rebranded to precision medicine, where they're like actually like, genotyping these people's tumors and getting really individualized, treatments for that. But I
yeah,
think they rebranded to precision. So I was like looking at the Google Trends data and I was like, has anybody used this before? Like, is
yeah,
this our thing? So it's kind of became our thing where we just are matching all the interventions that are out there, like the patient's values, and then like, what's reasonable, what works, and bringing it together to put together a plan, right? Because some people are of the mindset, it's like, I am really not going to change this about my life, but I want to reduce the risks, right? So
yeah,
if they're, not going to sleep enough, or they're going to, continue to use alcohol, or they're going to continue to smoke, that's not so much an issue anymore.
yeah.
Or whatever it may be. They're like, yeah, I'm not going to cut back on sodium for my blood pressure, which doesn't work for a lot of people, right? I mean, you have maybe a third of people that go to a low sodium diet and their blood pressure doesn't change. So you
Yeah, I
just
feel
took
like
all the
I've heard a
flavor
lot
out of
of,
your diet, and it's like, for what?
I know I've heard a lot of people in the medical field really starting to kind of debunk this whole like, you go to your doctor and your blood pressure's high, and they're like, well, you better start cutting salt out of everything that you're eating. It's like, did that really make that big of a difference?
Yeah. And I mean, it does work for more than half of people.
Yeah,
It brings down the number, but it's like, is it realistic? And like, what if they're an athlete and they're going to be cramping up and now they're exercising less because you told them to cut out the sodium? You have
yeah,
to think about all those things. Like, this is an individual, not a person that was in this study that lowered sodium intake.
yeah, yeah. Well, with the fact that you guys do actually address the lifestyle side, like what do you think are between lifestyle and labs some of the most common issues that you see people come in with when they're trying to optimize their health or their body composition?
Yeah. I mean, everyone wants more energy, right? I mean, myself included, right? If I never
Yeah.
got tired ever again in my life, I don't think I'd be sad about that.
Hmm.
But I would say the two biggest things I see are sleep apnea and then low ferritin levels.
Okay.
And I would pair that low ferritin with like other, like just nutrient deficiencies. And sometimes that is like a case of like, well, have you ever been like worked up for celiac disease? You have this low ferritin, it's not being absorbed for some reason, or like finding out why the ferritin is low. It's not as simple as just put it back in the system. And then, I mean, sleep apnea is just so common at a population level because of the body habitus of people and neck size. And, it's not always, you can't necessarily look at somebody and tell if they have sleep apnea. There are some very, skinny people that have a central sleep apnea that's basically silent. They're just not getting a signal from their brain to their lungs to breathe overnight. And they're not well recovered. Their brain is basically deprived of oxygen overnight, and they wake up with headaches every day. It's remarkable how many times people get treatment for sleep apnea or resolve their sleep apnea with weight loss. And they're like, I just thought everybody had headaches every morning.
Yeah.
And then they're like, I haven't had a headache since I started wearing the CPAP. I've heard that so many times.
Yeah. And that's usually more obstructive, correct?
Yeah, correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What about the people that maybe don't have the weight issues? What is that more of like a nervous system thing, or like what do you think drives sleep apnea in patients who maybe don't have a higher body fat percentage?
Yeah, usually it's I would say related to some like TBI brain trauma. So if somebody's been someone who's a veteran who's had some blast injuries, or someone who played a lot of football or rugby or things like that and had some head injuries, you could see that. And sometimes we don't know, like they have this central apnea and we're not sure where it comes from, and
Hmm.
that it gets coined like idiopathic. It's just a fancy medical word for we don't know why, but you have it. So they
Yeah.
call it idiopathic, like unobstructed or central sleep apnea, and it's just a little bit more advanced CPAP machine that they would use for that. And I even have some people with obstructive that prefer the fancier CPAP, if you will, just
Yeah.
because tolerability is a little better.
Yeah. I want to talk about both of those things in a little bit more depth. I'm going to stick with the sleep a little bit more. What do you like? What is a protocol for somebody that is struggling with sleep? Like, what are some of the things you guys typically recommend, whether that's more targeted supplementation, lifestyle behaviors, or different types of like practices that they can implement to really improve sleep? Some of the things we talk to people about are like obviously the basics of like have a cool and dark room and have a nighttime routine and make sure that you're putting yourself in a position to wind down from excessive screen time and some of the basic things that you hear everybody talking about. But are there other techniques or strategies that you guys, or even targeted supplements or things like that, that you guys would recommend to people on a regular basis who maybe it's not just as simple as saying like, yeah, you need a CPAP. Like, what other strategies would you recommend?
Yeah, so I tend to kind of separate them into two groups. There's like sleep onset, where it's like they're asleep. Once they're asleep, there's no problem. They sleep through the night, but getting to sleep is the struggle. And then there's people who fall asleep fine, but at 2 a.m. they wake up and they're wide awake, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's something misaligned in their circadian rhythm. And then like stress is a huge like barrier to sleep for a lot of people. If they've got a lot going on, they're kind of laying there ruminating and counting down, okay, if I go to sleep now, I'm only going to get 6 hours. And I'm only going to get 5.5. And tomorrow's going to be a disaster because I've got this thing coming up.
Mm-hmm.
So I ask people, like, how do you sleep when you're on vacation, right? Because you've removed not all of life stress, but a lot of it. And a lot of times they're like, oh, yeah, I sleep great. And it's like, well, what are you doing on vacation? And, if they're out at the beach, they're spending a lot of time out in the sun.
Yeah.
So their circadian rhythm is like figuring out, oh, like this is daytime and this is nighttime. And I don't think that we, like as Americans, spend enough time outside.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, people go into their garage, get in their car, drive to work, sit in an office inside all day, drive home, and then go sit in their house and stare at a TV in the evening.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's not going to work for every single person, but if it's feasible, like, get out, take a little walk at your lunch, have your morning coffee outside at your house, like little things like that, where you're getting those intermittent signals of like telling your brain when is morning and when is night. Like that's a simple one.
Mm-hmm.
And probably the cheapest like sleep hack is sleeping mask, because then you're blocking out all the light. Because I've heard people say, I don't have a great setup to put in these blackout curtains, or they're ugly. And it's like, well, just put little curtains over your eyes,
Yeah.
and it works. They've looked at it was really an interesting study because they wanted to not confound it by it being like the pressure that was
Mm-hmm.
causing people to like sleep better was the hypothesis. So they gave people sleeping masks, but they cut out eye holes, right?
Interesting.
So you have the pressure and the mask sensation, but he wasn't blocking any of the light.
Mm-hmm.
And they did that study and proved that it's actually the light blocking that leads to like better next day cognition.
Okay.
So if you have any like ambient light in your bedroom, it's like sleeping mask is a no-brainer.
Yeah. So it's funny because personal experience with this, my wife has been a sleep mask person for a long time. And I don't know how many years ago it was. It's at least 3 years ago. She's like, you should try to get one. And I'm thinking like, I'm not going to wear this pink thing on my eyes and make me feel emasculated by it. But we found one that was plenty fine. It was just an all black basic sleep mask. And I'm religious about it now. Like I almost can't sleep without it at this point. So it's crazy that you mentioned that because I don't think a lot of people recognize that as a simple opportunity. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and that's something, it's a, one-time purchase. It's not
Yeah.
like a supplement where you're making a recurring purchase and dependent on that for the good sleep. It's like you spend $8 on a mask and you can use it for 3 years or until it falls apart.
What do you tell the people that are like, well, I'm taking melatonin?
Yeah, I mean, if it works, that's great. It seems
Downsides?
like on average, melatonin works better the older you are,
Okay.
but there's a lot of people that get like a next day grogginess from melatonin just
Hmm.
in talking with people. And there's some people that actually have a paradoxical response where melatonin kind of amps them up. And I don't know exactly why that is, but there are people that have paradoxical responses to different supplements and medications. So it's not the most reliable thing.
Yeah.
Like the example of if I have someone that's taking melatonin, right, and they're that ruminating subtype, melatonin is probably not going to like relieve the anxiety, which is the root cause,
Yep.
right? And it's like, well, part of it's a mindset shift, right? Like, hey, you have to realize this situation is temporary, like kind of see the light at the end of the tunnel and realize, hey, this isn't going to go on forever. It may be a month, it may be a year, but it's not a permanent
Yeah.
situation. And there's people far more qualified than myself to like talk people through that.
Yeah.
But something like, L-theanine, right? It's derived from green tea. It actually has a nice kind of anti-ruminating. It's not going to just take away all your worries, but it'll kind of turn down the volume knob a bit. Some people are very sensitive to that. They may get quite a bit of an effect out of 100 milligrams.
Yeah.
Other people were increasing that to 400, 600, rarely like 800 milligrams. Kind of
Okay.
start low, like find your dose. And it doesn't work for everybody, but a lot of people do get benefit from that. It's probably one of the most frequently recommended supplements I have because it's cheap. A lot of good companies make it. It has that, sleep and rumination and anxiety benefit.
Yeah.
So I'll sometimes use it if people have like performance anxiety, right? If
Yep.
they're giving a presentation and they want to be kind of calm, cool, and collected, they'll use that. And if you combine it with caffeine, it seems like some of the data points to a little bit of synergy. I can't really tell when I take it or not take it, but some people are like, oh yeah, like it's a game changer. They almost like feel their focus like narrow in.
It's interesting how unique everybody's response to some of those different types of things are. So I'd seen some studies around L-theanine kind of helping with the stabilization of the boost you get from caffeine in the past, and tried it and didn't really know that I noticed a huge difference with it either. But like you'd said, there's people that would be like, oh wow, I like definitely noticed the difference there. How much of that do you think is placebo in certain situations versus the actual effects of the supplementation?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, with things like anxiety, like if I'm giving it to someone for anxiety, it probably is going to have a larger placebo response. Like
Yeah.
anxiety and depression, and even the drug trials versus placebo, huge placebo response. So they have to account for that. Otherwise, like every antidepressant ever would just get automatic stamp of approval, because you can see up to like a 70% placebo response rate. So I would say if someone's taking it to try to like really improve their like focus and attention, there probably is still some placebo, right? Like maybe 1 in 5 people like gets a boost just because they're taking something, regardless if it's a theanine or not. But I have some really clever patients that have found these battery of like cognitive tests online, or they'll do like a keyboarding test, right?
Yeah.
If their work is kind of computer intensive, and they'll look at, hey, what are my like error rates? How many words per minute am I typing? And they'll kind of test these things one by one, and that's how we develop their like cognitive stack, if you will.
Yeah. That's really cool. I never thought about like quantifying cognitive performance with something like that. I mean, it obviously is very simple in concept. How much do you think, in general, with some of the thing that we talked about earlier, where you look at mental health, anxiety, depression, how much do you think that plays into some of the challenges people face when they do get labs that are like quote unquote normal, the bleed over essentially from mental health that leads to the challenges in people's physical health and performance?
Yeah, I mean, it goes both ways. I mean, if an athlete, for example, right, is struggling with depression or anxiety, their performance is going to suffer. And if someone's physical health is suffering, then a lot of times their mental health is just going to follow suit. And, you have these trials that are well done that compare antidepressants to like physical activity or improving diet quality, and they have really large effect sizes.
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of the root of it when we're talking about, what should people do about it. But I don't want to be too hard on like primary care and traditional medicine, because I think a lot of them are trying to do the best they can with the resources they have, like a small amount of time. But a lot of times people are like, well, my labs are normal, so I must be depressed because my doctor told me to try an antidepressant.
Yeah.
So that it's a little bit worrisome to me,
Yeah.
because it's, potentially an unnecessary medications. And I do like to deprescribe things when appropriate. If somebody's like, been on antidepressant for 5 years and they're like, oh yeah, I've felt great for the last 4. It's like, well, let's try very slowly, like tapering off of that and see if it's something you actually need. Because a lot of people are also like, hey, can I get off some of this stuff? And sometimes the answer is like, no, you need to take that. Like, there's specific reasons, like you have a stent in your heart, like you need to be on that medication.
Yeah.
But other times it's like, yeah, like the proton pump inhibitors for acid reflux, Like even some of the older, like if someone's on several older diabetic medications, a lot of times you can condense that down to a newer and more effective one with less side effects. So there's situations like that where we can really streamline people, and just because you don't feel well and your labs are normal doesn't mean that you're depressed or that you're anxious. And certainly there are people with depression and anxiety. I mean, and the answer there is always, CBT, and people can do DIY CBT a little bit, right?
CBT, sorry. What?
Cognitive behavioral therapy.
Okay, cool.
Like I remember back in my education, if CBT was an answer on a test question, it's like that's always the first thing that you're supposed to recommend.
Yeah.
Because the downsides there are, I mean, it's a financial cost, so health equity, and not everybody can do that sort of thing. But there's a ton of like free resources and like cognitive reframing. Like the most common example I'll give people is like people have negative self-thinking. It's like, you can't do this because you're stupid, or remember when you messed up that one thing. So you just like sometimes physically write that down on a piece of paper and then write, okay, why is this belief not true? And now I tell people like, hey, if you have a hard time coming up with that on your own, ask someone you trust. I mean, you could even ask an AI like, hey, why is this not a true statement? And it's like, well, maybe this was misinterpreted by this person. Actually, probably nobody's even thinking about that thing that you said 2 weeks ago. But in people's minds, when they're ruminating, your mind is always going to be a step ahead of you unless you like get it out into a paper format on front of you. So those are very like lifestyle-based things, and sometimes pharmaceuticals can be very helpful there designed as a temporary solution. They weren't designed or studied to be given over decades and decades. For some people, their quality of life is just genuinely better on those, and we don't see downsides. But I would say for most people, putting in the work, whether it's exercise, nutrition, or kind of doing that uncomfortable work, kind of pushing back against your inner thoughts is where the bulk of the benefit will be.
Yeah. I love that you talked about that, man. I think that we are in a time in society where there's lots of opportunity for people to get rabbit holed into the expectation that they aren't enough and spiral down these pathways of anxiety and depression. And I do agree, just based on having worked with a ton of people in the health and fitness industry, that it feels like those medications tend to be overprescribed. And like, if I can't find something that's wrong with me, then I need to find something that's wrong with me. And it's like, well, maybe there's nothing wrong with you. You've just been telling yourself a story that's not true. And that activity, I think, is really simple. It's like, you gotta like brain dump some of these things out and just get it out in the open and process through it. And I think it's hard for people to take the time to do that, just because it's uncomfortable.
Yeah, uncomfortable, and people are more limited on time than ever. But I mean, if people make things a priority, they can find the time.
Yeah.
And that's uncomfortable in itself for a lot of people.
Yeah, slowing down is hard.
Yeah.
Especially in a society that gives you plenty of opportunities to stay distracted.
Yeah, for sure.
One of the things that you talked about earlier that I wanted to get into more, like what is ferritin, for the people that are like, you've been talking about ferritin. Why should I even care about ferritin? Why does it matter? Like, can you just give a little bit more of like a general overview and then dive into why that's something that is one of your top 3 most important metrics to pay attention to?
Yeah. So ferritin is basically your body's long-term iron stores. You get iron from your diet, mostly from animal-based foods, meats, things like, plant-based foods. Spinach has some iron in it, but it's not super bioavailable. So basically, there's a mismatch between what you're taking in, what's actually being absorbed, and what you're losing. Right. So this is very commonly affecting like young women. When I say like women of reproductive age, it's like any woman who could possibly become pregnant because she's, having menstrual cycles and blood loss. So like you can have heavy blood loss out, and that's why the ferritin is low. You can have a lack of ferritin or iron in, right, if somebody's on a like vegetarian or vegan diet. And then you can have absorption issues, right? So someone can have Crohn's disease or celiac disease, or, various number of things going on in the gut that are problematic. They could have, blood loss there from, parasite. That'd be a very rare cause. But all these sorts of things would be affecting the iron, and you test it, and if it's low, you're trying to figure out, okay, why? And it's like, well, I just, thought everybody had heavy periods, or, I just thought that all runners had low ferritin. Because you actually have, and maybe Kyle talked with you some about this, but foot strike hemolysis, where if you're running it, like either a higher weight or with high enough impact forces, your foot smacking the ground like pops some of these red blood cells.
Okay.
And you're losing iron
That's
from
very
that.
interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
So by just generally being somebody who is maybe not the lightest runner or a heavier runner or someone who does strike the ground hard, you said you're popping the red blood cells?
Yeah, it was kind of bizarre when I first
Yeah,
heard
no,
about it.
it's
I was
like,
like, you're
wait a second, tell me
popping
more
it?
about
It's
this.
like, yeah, so your foot comes down and like when you look at the forces that are exerted with sprinting, it's like insane. Even if like you're a 100-pound person.
I've seen, I mean, you're talking about thousands of pounds of force
Yeah.
in every foot strike, but enough to even like pop red blood cells is kind of weird to hear someone
Yeah.
say.
Yeah, it almost sounds like, you'd hear like these little popping like as you're running
Yeah,
along,
you're
but
like, oh
yeah, it's
God,
just the force that it hits, like some of those red blood cells that are in the capillaries at that time,
okay,
like they're gonna lyse or like pop open and then you lose some iron that way. And that's actually, how we treat people that have iron overload. So the opposite end of the spectrum, we just have them go and do either therapeutic phlebotomy, or if it's a mild case, they can go do some donations at like the Red Cross or similar organization. So yeah, I mean the runner's foot strike hemolysis is really interesting, and I would say that's probably more uncommon. But if people are getting into higher mileages and they're running at fairly fast paces, like
yeah,
they're competitive marathoners,
hmm
where they're I don't know, shooting for like a 2:30 marathon or something like that, that I would say is like a really, to me that's like an elite benchmark. They have their own like categories of like, 2:30 is not elite, but to me I'm
yeah,
like that's a crazy time. So if you're in those paces and you're doing a ton of miles per week, then yeah, I mean you can have some ferritin iron deficiency that develops from that. And if you're doing really long workouts, you can have a little bit of a lack of blood flow to the gut.
hmm
And then you can have some microscopic bleeding there where you're losing iron. So it's not just a thing for, people having menstrual cycles, although that's like the people that probably need to get their ferritin checked the most and then don't end up getting that.
yeah. Yeah, that's very interesting, man. And I think that it's easier to understand the potential loss with women because of the menstruation process and the natural cycle. But do you feel like that's as common in men as well, or do you see that very often in men with like ferritin issues or iron deficiencies?
We do. I mean, we see people on a whole, spectrum of diets, kind of
hmm
whatever they've landed on that
I
feels
guess diet makes
sustainable for
sense.
them.
Yeah.
Yeah, so more so diet, and then, men are the ones that tend to accumulate the iron, right? And that's where maybe they're in their 40s or 50s, and you'll see that ferritin that's like, hey, your ferritin's like 800. It's like, have you ever had this checked before? And they're like, no, never had it checked. And then
Yeah.
you do a recheck to make sure it's not just a one-off, and it's like, no, that's still high. So we pull off that extra iron, and you can do some genetic testing for that. Some patients, like, they want to know the why, and about 20% of people, like here in the US, are going to have a mutation that predisposes them to accumulating iron.
Yeah.
The management is the same, kind of regardless of which gene you have, unless it's like a family planning, genetic counseling type situation.
Yeah.
But yeah, some people want to know, and sometimes they have iron overload without the three main genes, and it's probably like a ferritin or something else.
Yeah. That makes sense. Well, I know I'm kind of going all over the place here, but back to like the sleep and recovery side of things. Sleep obviously being a massive piece of what helps influence people in the recovery side. When you guys work with people who maybe are more active and, under recovering, what are some of the other common things you see that are maybe leaving room on the table for people to enhance their recovery? And like what things really make up for this idea of recovery outside of sleep? And then obviously all the stereotypical hacks that you see with like ice baths and the saunas and all those types of things.
Yeah, so I mean, the ice baths work for recovery, but they may not be working towards your actual goal,
Yeah.
right? So if your goal is to get an adaptive response from the exercise, perform better, get bigger muscles, like you're going to be less sore from the ice bath, but you're probably not going to get quite as much growth or improvements in fitness out of that workout.
Yeah.
So like if somebody loves the ice bath after training and that's like their favorite part of the day,
Yep.
that's fine. Like they can still make progress, but it's not going to be, squeezing the most juice out of that workout. Sleep, probably a scenario that's come up many times is if people are doing particularly long or they like have a high intensity workout, especially if that's in the evening, because,
Yeah.
people's schedules are different and not everyone can get up and train in the morning. Getting their body temperature to come down the first half of the night, they just feel like I'm just, waking up hot. I'm laying there and my heart rate is faster than it should be. And you can actually lower body temperature fairly well with like glycine,
Okay.
which is just an amino acid. You buy it in a powder over the counter and throw maybe 3 grams of that in a little bit of water before you go to sleep. And it actually helps your growth hormone release a little bit
Interesting.
and also helps to drop the body temperature to help you get into that deep sleep. And I'm not even opposed to if someone is like they have 1 day a week where it's a really high intensity day and they need to drop the body temperature, you know, using like 2 Tylenols to do that. If
Interesting.
it's once a week, that's not going to like be a measurable tax on the liver. Now, if you're taking Tylenol 4 times a day, every day, that's different, and that can get you into liver
Yeah, just
toxicity
like an
quite quickly.
acetaminophen, is that what you're?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Interesting. I don't know that I've heard of anybody thinking about it from a talking about it from like a body temperature reduction standpoint, but I wear an Oura ring, so like the times whenever I don't sleep as well, it's usually because I can't get my body to calm down from something I did late in the day, or
Okay, yeah,
I
yeah.
was out playing with my kids in the yard or doing some yard work or had a hard workout. And usually the lack of quality sleep is not usually my ability to like go to sleep. It's my body temperature or my heart rate coming down because my body's still just like working and on overdrive from those
Yeah.
things. But glycine, like what would you recommend from like a typical dosage for something like that?
Yeah, so you can like 3 grams, I think, is a decent starting point. You can
Yep.
go up from there. If I'm remembering right, I think they've tried like north of like 30 grams in some studies and looked at the growth hormone response to
Yeah.
that. It's going to have some diminishing returns, but it has a really good safety profile, tends to be a little bit sedating.
Yeah.
You're not going to be out of it, but it may help you kind of drift off if you're kind of ramped up from a evening workout, that kind
Yeah.
of thing.
Interesting. It makes sense. I never heard of it necessarily from like a body temp standpoint, which is cool because I don't think a lot of people recognize the idea or realize that like part of getting deep restful sleep is yes, like obviously like going to sleep, but lowering your heart rate, decreasing your body temperature. What kind of changes in body temperature would you expect to see at night? Is that like significant? Like, because I think everybody knows like when they take their temperature, like what it needs to be, but how significant is your body temperature change during times where you're intentionally recovering or sleeping?
Yeah, I actually don't know offhand. I want to say it's around like, a degree or two that your body temperature is dropping in that first half of the night.
Yeah.
And then you hit I know the body has a little bit of rewarming when you hit like your REM sleep cycles, because a lot of people say, oh, that's when I wake up and I'm sweating.
Yeah.
And one reason that could be is that that's when you tend to have more apnea episodes is during REM sleep, that second half of the night.
Mm-hmm.
So like, it's like, okay, that's a reason to go ahead and get a home sleep study. I have a pretty low threshold for checking those, and
Yeah.
like people can get the answer in 2 or 3 weeks now, because you don't have to go into a lab and have a bunch of strangers watch you with wires over your head
Yeah.
and all that stuff.
That feels like it's almost counterproductive. Like if I'm in that environment, I'm probably not going to be able
It's
to
not
get
going to
a
be
great
normal
assessment.
sleep for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm not going to get a great assessment. So like, say I'm somebody who just genuinely wants to be better, where would you start me? Like I'm assuming a lab test, like would you do the whole thing? Like what's your general recommendation? Someone comes in and says, "Hey, you know what? I just want, like you said earlier, I want more energy. I want to feel better. I want to perform better. I want to look better." Like where do I even start? What would your like entry level protocol be for people to just be generally taking steps in the right direction for that?
Yeah, I mean, as far as like your entry level, lowest dollar amount in, they can get a really good panel, Sage Bio, which myself, Dr. Gillett, and another one of our physician partners own.
Yep.
And it has a AI in there that is, you can think of it like ChatGPT, but a ChatGPT where your data is under HIPAA guards and like it's protected and it's
Hmm.
not being sold or used to train anything. So you can go in there and say like, what can you tell me about these labs and like, my energy levels, or like, is there anything here that's deficient? And it's not going to give medical advice, but it will basically provide you with a framework of like, oh, like it looks like you're, like we could say ferritin, right? We've kind of hit on that one a lot, but it's like, oh, it looks like you have an iron deficiency and that could be affecting your sleep and energy levels and
Yeah.
even restless legs. And it's going to pull all these sorts of things in a really cool way. Or you could ask it about, well, how does my thyroid look? And it's like, actually, your thyroid looks like it's really good. Because a lot of people have, they've kind of anchored to something when they're going to get a blood test. They're like, oh,
Hmm.
I bet I've got low testosterone, or I
Yep.
bet I've got a thyroid issue. And then they go in and they get it, and it's like, your testosterone's like 800. Like, and then it's almost like I've seen people like get kind of disappointed. It's like, oh, like I thought that was it.
Yeah.
But it's short-lived, right? Because then they realize, oh, well, just because it's not the testosterone doesn't mean that it's all in my head. Like there is a reason that I'm feeling this way.
Yeah. I love how you guys termed it Doctor AI, the not doctor
Yeah, it's
piece
definitely
of it.
not a doctor. Yeah.
Yeah, it makes sense. And it seems logical, but if you're going to try to optimize, you need to look at it from the perspective of optimizing and seeing a bigger picture, not just saying, hey, my insurance covers this annual blood work. I've got a physical with my doc. Like everything looks good, right? Just to bring us full circle with what we talked about earlier. Like, how would you help guide people down a path to maybe dig a little bit deeper, to think a little bit broader, and just to change their perspective on like normal being ideal?
Yeah, I mean, there's several studies at this point with like vitamin B12, right? Which, I mean, that's a simple test. People could probably even ask their primary care to check a B12 level. And they would probably do it not in a begrudging way if it's the only thing they're asking for, right? If you ask for too many things, then, because of the limited time. And I
Hmm.
try not to beat up on the traditional system too much because I think there are good people that are there.
Yeah, for sure.
But like even a low normal B12 doesn't correlate with the best brain aging over time, right? So on the reference range in the lab, it's not going to be flagged as abnormal, right? If your B12 is like 300, 400, perfectly normal. But if you look at some of the data that have measured like what is someone's exposure to B12 over decades, you can see some signs of like, hey, their brain is maybe aging a little faster than it should be, or we're seeing these people with higher incidence of like cognitive decline. The B vitamin deficiency study I mentioned where they saw a faster brain atrophy, you kind of put that in confluence with the homocysteine level to kind of look at, oh, like my B12 is low and my homocysteine level is high, like I need to correct that.
Yeah.
And even if the homocysteine level isn't clinically high, right, it may be 13, which is going to be normal on the lab reference range. We want to push that a little bit lower, push the B12 a little bit higher. Even something like vitamin D, we'll give an athlete example. If you have a vitamin D that's like normal, right, it's 30 something,
Hmm.
which most people are going to be vitamin D deficient. And I think the Endocrinology Society has kind of overshot their reference range initially. And now they're trying to like reel it back and be like, well, maybe we shouldn't test for vitamin D because we screwed up the reference range.
Yeah.
But if someone has a vitamin D, let's say like 32, it's normal. Like they're probably where they need to be from an immune standpoint, right? They're not more likely to get sick at that level. But if you look at one study was done in soccer players, right? And they said, well, these people have normal vitamin D levels, but let's supplement them with more, get them to above 50 and see what happens. And they saw some improvements in like vertical jump, right? So if you want to unlock the muscle health benefits of vitamin D, you want that to be a little bit higher than just normal.
Yeah.
And I think it's like 60% of people that are either insufficient or deficient in vitamin D. So like that one is extremely cheap as well, and something that I think probably more than half the population like should be taking just because our sunlight exposure isn't high enough. And for some people, like I've talked to guys that work in construction, they're managing job sites in like Arizona, and they're still vitamin D deficient, and they're like, how? Like, how does that
Isn't
work?
that
And
like more of an absorption issue maybe in that scenario, or?
they're not great converters of it, right? So
Yeah.
they're getting plenty of sunlight, but for whatever reason, genetically or something in that process, they're not converting it. Sometimes that can be magnesium.
Hmm.
That's the thing that plays a role there. But yeah, I mean, people are surprised when they do get a lot of sunlight that they don't have these amazing vitamin D levels.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing you say is that one, going from normal, quote unquote normal, to something that would be more optimal is going to unlock performance and opportunities in your health and your overall well-being. So that's an obvious reason why. But two, you may have every reason to believe that something looks right and that you're getting the sufficient dosage of sunlight or nutrients to really drive the proper levels, but it could be something else in the system that's not necessarily allowing that to be optimal. Is that right?
Yeah, so you're measuring it on multiple levels, right? So just like with any nutrient, right? You have the absorption, you have how much you're taking in from your diet, and then you have like, are you losing that somewhere?
Yeah.
So like if you are an athlete, you're going to have a little bit higher demand for, some things like magnesium and your B vitamins just because you're utilizing more energy in your body.
Yeah.
It's not a like astronomical amount, but like you are going to have a higher utilization of that, certainly of like carbohydrates, calories in general, things
Yeah.
like that. So you get the blood test and you're kind of getting the endpoint of all those inputs, right? What's the outcome of everything that I'm taking in, how I'm absorbing it, how it's converting, and then you get it right there on a paper and you can say, oh, this is something I can do something with. And
Yeah.
even if you don't care about the muscle health benefits of vitamin D, most people care about their long-term cognition. Like that's
Yeah.
the one I think scares a lot of people, like, myself included. It's like, I don't want to be 100 and be like in great shape, but like can't remember where I put my dumbbell,
Yeah.
that kind of thing. So I think that when you talk about like, hey, this is something we can do now that's going to pay dividends later, and it's not a super high cost. I mean, I actually looked earlier this week. You can get a B12 lozenge, 60 of them for like less than $10 on
Yeah.
Amazon, and they actually work just as well as B12 shots. So if people are having absorption issues with B12, like in the gut, or they're older and lack something called intrinsic factor that helps facilitate that absorption.
Yeah.
Just use a lozenge, and like really there's no need for people to go into their doctor and get a B12 shot. Now you want to measure, right, and make sure that like your supplement actually has B12 that you think you're taking that has B12.
Yeah.
But it's like literally, pennies, so somebody can do that and improve their status, and a low-cost intervention that pays dividends. I think that's accessible for a lot of people.
Yeah. Well, cool. If you want to get your labs done, I know you mentioned this, but Sage Bio, accessible anywhere in the United States, correct?
Yep, sagebio.com. We have our most popular panels on there. We have just a pure nutrition panel. There's things on there that we'll be adding in the future and upgrading the interface. So new things will be rolling out all the time. It's been really fun to build and work on.
I can imagine, yeah, a fun project that gives you guys a chance to help people beyond the local range of who you probably work with mostly. Do you guys have most of your clients work locally, or do you have a pretty broad footprint around where you guys work with folks?
Yeah, we're pretty broad. So I know between myself and Dr. Gillett, at one point we had, I think, almost 40 state licenses medically. So, and a lot of people can, fly in and just establish care here, and then we can see them remotely.
Yeah.
So, anytime someone is signing up with the clinic, they're establishing, in the state of Kansas for like medical care reasons.
Yep.
But yeah, we have a broad footprint. So like I have a California license, Florida license, Texas license. Those are kind of the bigger states for us. And then, locally is where our, the vast majority of our patients are. But it's nice to be able to, talk to somebody that's in, like Colorado, and they say, oh yeah, I saw you on, we watched your podcast. I saw Kyle on this podcast, and then I listened for like 6 months, and now it's like, I want to work with these guys.
Yeah.
So it's a really cool experience. And then I feel like I get intel from kind of all over the country. People are like, yeah, Colorado was a weird ski season. We didn't have much snow and all this. And I was like, oh, I just hadn't been out there, didn't think of it. And people kind of just, talking to people is more than just a number, kind of get to know them and what their interests are a little bit.
Yeah, I love that. You guys definitely take more of a human-to-human approach than you're just another client or patient at the clinic,
Yeah, exactly right.
Well, cool. So you mentioned the podcast. Where can people find you?
Yeah, so I'm probably most active on Instagram at James O'Hara NP. That's where I try to post things that are either useful or funny, sometimes both.
Yeah.
And then I'm also on Twitter at the same handle. I guess it's X now. And I'm a little bit active on there. I'm trying to get better at it.
Yeah.
That's the one I don't understand quite as well.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, GilletteHealth.com is the website if people want to see the full suite of services that we offer here locally or through telemedicine. People can check that out.
Cool. And then you guys have the Gillett Health Podcast as well.
That's right. Yeah, it's on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and it's just the Gillett Health Podcast.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining us today. If you guys are looking for a hookup on Sage Bio Labs, you can use the code AVEXIA. And thank you for joining. We will catch you next time.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yes, sir.
This episode of the Higher Form Podcast is powered by Avexia Health and Performance, your home for smart training, simple nutrition, and real accountability. Built to help you look, feel, and perform your best. Whether you're just getting started or chasing your next level, visit AvexiaKC.com to learn more and start building your higher form today.